Sit back and throw one back with your pinky in the air and a middle finger to the world, and join me, the eclectic gentleman Stephen Watts, as we look back on this day in pro wrestling history. But before we do, put that drink down, like, share, and subscribe, and without further ado, let's get our wrestling history on. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, it is November 19th, and we're going to start off as we always do on a positive note. That's right. These are your pro wrestling birthdays. 1928, former wrestler, actor, and politician, Dara Singh. 1960, the First Lady of Professional Wrestling, Miss Elizabeth. Of course, on the flip side of that coin, your pro wrestling deaths for November 19th. Former WWF enhancement talent, Silvano Sosa. All right, enough of the sad stuff. It's time to get to the meat and potatoes. That's right. These are your pro wrestling history highlights for November 19th. Jumping in the Wayback Machine and going all the way to 1906, where we see Clarence Weber defeat Bhutan Singh for the Australian heavyweight title in Melbourne, Australia. Jumping all the way to the 50s, 1951, Danny McShane defeats Vern Gagne in Memphis, Tennessee to win the NWA World Junior Heavyweight title. 3 years later, in 1954, Pollo Torres defeats the Sheik for the NWA Texas Heavyweight title in Houston, Texas. A 2-year jump this time to 1956, Otto Lenz and Jackie O'Reilly defeat Enrique Romero and Black Hawk to win the Western States Tag Team titles in Phoenix, Arizona. Our final stop in the 50s, 1958, Billy Wicks defeats Gorgeous George to win the NWA Gulf Coast Heavyweight title in Mobile, Alabama, beginning his second reign. Grooving into 1960, Johnny Valentine and Buddy Rogers defeat the Fabulous Kangaroos for the United States Tag Team titles, the forerunner to the WWF World Tag Team titles. Making 2 stops in the year 1966. First, Mad Dog Vachon defeats Dick the Bruiser for the AWA World Heavyweight title in Omaha, Nebraska, beginning his 5th reign. Our second stop in 1966, Ray Stevens and Art Nielsen defeat George and Sandy Scott to win the International Wrestling Alliance Australian Tag Team titles in Melbourne, Australia. Grabbing my best pair of bell-bottoms and going to 1970, Dory Funk Sr. defeats Thunderbolt Patterson for the Southwest Brass Knuckles title in Amarillo, Texas, beginning his second reign and ending Patterson's 4th. 4 years later, in 1974, Jack Donovan ends the 6th NWA Gulf Coast Heavyweight title reign of Ken Lucas in Mobile, Alabama. Making 3 stops in 1976. First, Chavo Guerrero Sr. defeats Ken Mantell to win his 5th NWA America's Heavyweight title. Next, Thunderbolt Patterson defeats the Sheik for the Toronto version of the NWA United States Heavyweight title in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. This ended the Sheik's 2nd reign. And our third and final stop in 1976, Bob Kelly defeats the Wrestling Pro for the NWA Alabama Heavyweight title in Dothan, Alabama, ending the Pro's 5th reign. Our final stop in the 70s, 1979, Steve Regal and Hector Guerrero defeat the Blonde Bombers, Larry Lantham and Wayne Ferris, a.k.a. the future Honky Tonk Man, for the AWA Southern Tag Team titles in Memphis, Tennessee, ending the Bombers' 3rd reign. Grabbing my boombox and going to the 80s, 1981, Tommy Martin defeats Bob Sweaton to win the NWA Central States Heavyweight title in Kansas City, Kansas, ending Sweaton's 4th reign. That next year in 1982, Leo Burke and Bret Hart defeat Duke Myers and the Dynamite Kid for the Stampede International Tag Team titles in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. A 2-year jump this time to 1984, Jacques Rougeau Jr. wins the vacant NWA Mid-American Heavyweight title in Memphis, Tennessee. Next, in 1985, Lex Luger defeats Wahoo McDaniel to win the Florida version of the NWA Southern Heavyweight title in Tampa, Florida, ending McDaniel's 2nd reign. Fast forwarding 3 years to 1988, Brian Lee defeats Mike Miller in a tournament final for the Championship Wrestling Association heavyweight title in Memphis, Tennessee. And our last stop in the 80s, 1989. Bill Dundee defeats Tony Anthony for the USWA Southern Heavyweight title in Memphis, Tennessee, the first of 4 reigns for Dundee. Grabbing my flannel and going to the decade of grunge, 1990. Curt Hennig defeats Kerry Von Erich for the WWF Intercontinental title in Rochester, New York, beginning his second run with the title. That next year in 1991, WCW Clash of the Champions 17 was held at the Civic Center in Savannah, Georgia, with a main event of WCW World Champion Lex Luger defeating Rick Steiner. Making 2 stops in 1994, first, ECW ran the ECW Arena in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, with a main event of Ron Simmons and 2 Cold Scorpio defeating Shane Douglas and Brian Pillman with Sherry Martel, when Sherry Martel accidentally, quote-unquote, hit Shane with her shoe. It was then revealed that she was wearing a Ric Flair shirt under her sweater, prompting Douglas to pile drive her. Pillman was a last-minute substitution for Steve Austin, who was injured and unable to make the show. Our second stop in 94, a tournament was held to crown a new NWA World Heavyweight Champion in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. The previous champion, Shane Douglas, had thrown the belt down after his tournament win to become the first ECW World Heavyweight Champion in an angle that turned Eastern Championship Wrestling into Extreme Championship Wrestling. In the tournament final, Chris Candido defeated Tracy Smothers to win the NWA World Heavyweight title. 1995, the WWF held Survivor Series in Landover, Maryland, with a main event of Bret Hart defeating Diesel for the WWF World Heavyweight title. Those were your short but sweet pro wrestling history highlights for November 19th. I'm the Eclectic Gentleman Stephen Watts, and we'll see you tomorrow.